Well, Chris, thanks for jumping on. It's great to visit with you.
Great to be on, Cable. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So how was your black bear hunt?
It was slow but good enough. We finally found one good bear. It was a lot of little bears, and then suddenly one good one showed up, and we made the most out of the opportunity. So yeah, it worked
It-
out well.
Where were you?
Up in Saskatchewan, we've got a place up there, so we hunt waterfowl in the fall, and this was the first chance to hunt bear in that area. I've hunted bear before in Saskatchewan, but yeah, so it was fun to get up there, see it in the
Cool.
spring.
Yeah, I've bear hunted in Alberta and on Vancouver Island, but never Saskatchewan.
Yeah,
Uh,
a lot of bears on Vancouver Island.
oh yeah, yeah. I was supposed to go back this spring, but I had to get 3 hernias fixed up,
Nice,
and yeah, and that's
lucky
what
you.
I was gonna ask you that, like, so because I was struggling with. I mean, I knew I had them for a while. It's like doing this for a living, which month of the year would you pick to have something that's going to lay you up for 4 weeks?
Oh
Done.
man. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's Octobers, Novembers are pretty sacred. Other than that, I could probably live with a short-term problem, but you sure
Uh,
wouldn't ask for it, that's for sure.
yeah. Well, so I went to Argentina in mid-April, so I was like, couldn't do that, and then wanted a turkey hunt, and then well, you said September, October, well, October, November, like December is huge for whitetail here, and then duck
Hmm.
hunting, and so that cancels December and January, and then we have trade show season, and so that's like January bleeding into February. So I was like, got to do it before turkey season, or got to do it now because I go to Africa in the summer. Then there's family vacation and
Well, I
all
think
this.
the key is to make sure it's always an elective procedure.
Right? Yeah, take care of it before it gets too bad.
Yeah.
Um, I guess the answer is there's never a good time for it. So I had the opportunity to read this article that you wrote for Forbes, which is interesting. I want to know how you got hooked into writing for Forbes, which doesn't really seem like a publication that would put out scientific based hunting literature, right? So I didn't know that you wrote for Forbes until I saw that on your social media.
Hmm.
But been keeping up with you over the years. So tell us a little bit about your career in the hunting space, and then how you ended up writing for Forbes, and then we'll discuss this article that I want to
Oh
get into
wow.
regarding elephants.
Yeah, well, look, I've been doing this a long time, and started as a magazine editor out of Georgia, hired by David Morris to run some of their magazines at Game and
Mm.
Fish magazines, and went out to work for Boddington out at Hunting Magazine for a few years. Had interned with them in Los Angeles prior to that, and then Ducks Unlimited was taking kind of a shift away from just sort of a green, eco magazine, and they wanted somebody who had some hunting background that could bring kind of that audience along with them, and realizing of course that the DU audience and membership were significantly comprised of hunters, so they wanted somebody who could kind of create content in that realm for that magazine. And then boy, we got involved in creating a TV show for Ducks Unlimited back in the day when it was TNN, if you remember, the Nashville
Mm.
network, a Gaylord Entertainment property, and which became Spike TV and ultimately became Paramount, which of course is what the big hit Yellowstone is on right now. So we just kind of saw that, and then went out to LA when Bob Peterson bought Sports Afield magazine. Since I had known him working for Hunting Magazine and interning out there years earlier to that, he said, "Would you mind coming out and running Sports Afield magazine?" And I'd always loved Sports Afield magazine. It was the
Mm.
only outdoor magazine to ever win a National Magazine Award, and I think they won two or three, which is sort of the Oscars of all magazines, not just outdoor magazines. And back in the Tom Paw era, and when he was the editor, and Terry McDonald, who went on to be the editor of Sports Illustrated, was my predecessor. So yeah, it was a fun time, and we created TV properties around obviously Ducks Unlimited, then Sports Afield magazine, and then I just sort of saw the emergence of branded entertainment at that time was really transforming kind of the outdoor marketplace for sure, but kind of the entire marketplace. And this is pre-social media. This is
Right.
pre-podcast, pre Instagram and Facebook and all those
Do you
things. So
think so? Your
yeah.
predecessor Terry, I forget his last name, went on
Sure.
to be the editor of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, Terry McDonald actually
Could that
came from.
happen today in today's climate? Would they take someone from the hunting space and put them in a pop culture space and be like, "Go get it"? Or do you think the backlash would be too great? They'd be like, "No,
You know,
screw
once
this."
upon a time, it's interesting. He was also the editor of Esquire, I believe, and Esquire
Huh.
had a Esquire Sportsman special edition that they had done when he
Oh,
was the
wow.
editor of that, and so you can only imagine Esquire today, right? Having hunting
Right.
stories and shotguns and rifles and bullets and safaris and but that wasn't that many years ago, which
Yeah.
sort of gets us to the cultural shift, right? That you cover a lot
Mhm.
in terms of what's happening in the country when it comes to how people view hunting, hunters. Do they understand the role of hunting and conservation, the funding mechanisms that are built in the so-called North American model? All those things are really understood by a very small, as you know, percentage of the population. The majority of Americans have no clue about any of that stuff. So yeah, it would be difficult to imagine at this juncture
Mm.
that Esquire would launch another Esquire Sportsman edition, or Sports Illustrated would have, Robert F. Jones writing hunting stories from Africa, which they used to have. So
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
it's a different day, no doubt.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit about you. How did you get hooked up with Forbes? When I think of Forbes, I think of like this financial. I mean, I know
Yeah,
they cover a lot of stuff, but I think isn't Forbes pretty synonymous with the financial world?
it is. It is. I think what's interesting is Forbes did a publication, a few of these actually, called Forbes FYI, which were really about lifestyle.
Uh-huh.
So, what is it these people that are in business, that are captains of industry, what is it they like to do in the off hours, right? What is their passion, not just their vocation? And so that got into, wow, a lot of these guys like to fish, they like to go hunting, they're really outdoor adventurers, and that is their passion. And so Forbes, I think, is interesting. And what's interesting to me as a writer for Forbes is that it's not preaching to the choir. Most of us, in the outdoor business, talk to ourselves, talk to a converted audience. We're not really changing a lot of minds with who we're
Mhm.
talking to by virtue of our platforms. And Forbes is one of those where it's a wealthy, affluent audience. It's international. I think they've got 127 million views of their content every month. I think it's in 17 languages, something like that. So it's this big international platform that, yeah, business centric, but also lifestyle, and so it kind of plays together. And they give me a lot of latitude to write about the things I enjoy. And my lane is the outdoors. It's conservation. It's the
Mhm.
gun industry. It's sort of controversial issues when it comes to international conservation and public policy. All those things are kind of in a bucket that most of the rest of their team either doesn't know much about or doesn't really care about.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, interesting background there. How many times have you been to Africa?
Something over 50. I think it's about
Mhm.
55 times. We've done, boy, we've
So
done
about
a,
50 more than me. I think I've
yeah,
been
well, it's
six
spent
times.
a lot of time on ground. In Africa. We've done a lot of television over there. I think we've
Uh-huh.
done almost 60 outdoor TV series since we founded the company 27 years ago. And a big chunk of those series had portions of their series devoted to Africa.
Mhm.
Several were strictly African. Dangerous Game, Deadliest Hunts. Those are Africa centric shows.
Right.
So yeah,
And how many times have you had the opportunity to hunt elephant?
I've hunted elephant twice, and and I write about this in my book, and I've written about this in other publications, just in terms of, how different is elephant hunting than everything else, and it really is, only because elephants are so different than everything else. And yeah, and it's something that took me a long time to get interested in. I didn't go to Africa right away saying I want to go elephant hunting. In fact, and I write very specifically about this in my Game Days book. Um, or my director's cut book as well. And I didn't have any interest, and then I started getting in safari camps. I'd go plains game hunting. Maybe I'd shoot birds. Maybe I'd do some fishing in Africa. But I started getting around these folks that had gone elephant hunting, and they sort of described the experience. And dangerous game in general, as you know, is very, very different And there's kind of hunting, and then there's dangerous game hunting. It's a
Right.
completely different mindset.
Well, the mindset is, I mean, it's on display from your pH. They go from, slapping you on the butt to getting out the double barrel and, and 350 grain bullets, and it becomes more of a somber deal. Like, we're going to
Yeah,
postpone the laughs and the good times because now this is, we're hunting something that could screw you up pretty bad.
yeah, you're definitely more focused. I mean, the stakes are much higher, and kind of everybody in that party, because there's trackers, there's the pH, there's oftentimes other people in that ensemble, and they're depending on you to make a good first shot. And the series we did called Dangerous Game for 15 years, we always interviewed somebody who had been chomped, stomped, gored, or chewed by the species being hunted in that episode. So to the viewer, it became not theoretical that this is dangerous game, but very real. And it was a reminder through the voice and the likeness of people that were recounting the experiences that they had with these dangerous animals. So it's very much a real proposition. The first shot is everything in dangerous game hunting, and once you unleash the bullet, there's going to be a sequence of events you can't reel back, and
Mm-hmm.
they're either good or bad, and the bad ones can be very bad. And I think that's just the focus, the adrenaline, the genes that you awaken when you hunt dangerous game are just different than other kinds of hunting.
Mm-hmm. So I've done a Cape buffalo hunt and then did a rhino vita dart, and I had really mixed emotions on where's the line of exploiting the rhino versus is this good for conservation, you know? And I walked away from it thinking it was good, but I had trepidation going into it, just like how are they monitoring how many times these are darted and
Mhm.
what is the negative health impact potentially on the bull that we were going to hunt. But the experience, like we hunted the rhino. I mean, yes, it was in a 30,000 acre high fence, but yeah, I mean, the high fence is there to keep the poachers out. And the outfit I hunted with, we were just driving by and I happened to film two lions breeding out in the pasture. And I was like, whoa, that's super cool. And he said, please don't put that on social media. And I was like, why not? I mean, I said, sure, of course, whatever you want, but he knows we're going to put the rhino stuff on YouTube and everywhere. It's like an educational thing. And he's like, because not a lot of ranches have lions and rhinos. And if they put two and two together, they'll come here and they'll kill my rhinos one way or another. So I was like, wow, okay, that puts it into perspective. And then, whatever the cost is associated with the Vita Dart. I mean, he has active 24-hour anti-poaching there, and this is in South Africa. You've been to places that are much more, I would say, wild, and think about the darker reaches, less explored parts of Africa. I mean, some I would imagine are still the Wild West. I imagine that stuff is tenfold in those environments.
Yeah, I mean, you get to Central Africa, you get to CAR and Cameroon and places like that, and I mean, it's difficult to control what's happening when you've got insurgents on ground, you've got the verge of civil war happening, and
Mm-hmm.
wildlife is not a priority whatsoever. And yeah, the exploitation that happens when you have that kind of dysfunction at the governmental level is pretty hard to it's very appalling. And what happens is the wildlife gets slaughtered, and that's that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So whether or not you enjoyed darting a rhino is kind of almost immaterial to what is the outcome of the rhino. What's the best use and hope of the rhino? What's the best value that it brings to make sure that there's more of them around, I guess, is
Yeah,
the question.
yeah. And I did enjoy it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, we stalked it.
Yeah.
It took. I mean, it wasn't like a 5 day deal. We did it in one morning, but
Yeah.
Carl my PH was very adamant. He's like they don't have good eyesight. They can smell you and they can hear you. He's like, so when you shoot, be very still, because if you move, they're going to hear you, and that would be the only reason why they might charge. And I shot, and then of course I took a step, and here comes the rhino, and Carl just grabs me and pulls me behind the tree, and the rhino runs by, and I'm like, well, thanks, buddy. I don't know if I was
License
about to
plate.
get stomped, but it was all on video, and I was like, that was a little closer than I was thinking. was going to happen. But yeah, so you have tons of dangerous game experience. You've been in those places where elephant poaching, I'm sure, is, um, I mean, rampant to say the least. It probably isn't as bad as it once was historically, but that's what I want to talk about as far as your article is concerned. Um, I hate it when first world countries meddle in third world country policy and you know, in relation to wildlife management. And I always put like we gave them the playbook. We're like, here's the North American model, utilize it, and they're like, okay, we're going to do that. And then 15 years later, we're like, no, no, no. Actually, we changed our minds. We're going to dictate how you should manage your wildlife. And it's, to me, it's like modern day colonialism. Um, it's infuriating because the wildlife loses, and we all sit here in our glass houses in Germany and the United States and France and all these other uh, leading powers of the world, and we try to tell them what to do. And it's just, I don't know, pisses me off. But you've been there, done it. How many elephant does Africa have left?
Well, there's kind of two Africas when it comes to elephants. There's the Southern African nations. I think there's 7 countries now out of the 37 that still have elephant hunting, and
Mm-hmm.
and they have about 80% of all the elephants in Africa. And
Weird.
those elephants, by the way, are doing fine. And so the question is what about the other countries that have banned hunting?
Uh-huh.
For instance, Kenya stopped all hunting in 1977. Well, what's happened to the elephant herd since then? Well, they've been decimated. They've dropped in half, over that span of time.
And why is
And
that?
well, that's because the poachers have moved in. There's no anti-poaching funding. There's no teams on ground to prevent it. So it's entirely predictable. So I guess the fundamental reason I wrote the piece in Forbes was just to ask the basic question: does the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really care about elephants?
Uh-huh.
Their recent actions to make it more difficult to import elephants taken in Africa from nations that have legal hunting is counterproductive, and it's based on the science now. We know full well that isn't doing any good. In fact, it's counterproductive in that it's removing the economic value that these animals have on ground. And what's the most disconcerting, I think, about the relationship between the West and Africa right now, and the leaders, in London and Paris and Washington, et cetera, is that they're completely disregarding the people on ground. They're not listening to the
Mm.
leaders, countries that actually have the elephants. And it's such a condescending, almost colonial view of Africa that really is appalling in this day and age, frankly. And so as you look at what the Fish and Wildlife Service did, there's fewer than 500 legally harvested elephants taken every year.
500 trophy hunters taking elephants annually.
And it's somewhere between 400 and 450 elephants a year are taken, and there's something like 400 to 500,000 elephants in total. So it's
Wow.
biologically, as I write in the piece, it's biologically irrelevant what these sport hunters are taking. So the mere fact that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would focus on something as utterly irrelevant as the take by sportsmen, forget all that sportsmen do, forget the incentives that they bring by virtue of giving the animals value. But the mere fact that they would focus on such a minuscule component of the problem tells me this isn't being driven by care for elephants. This is being driven by some ideological agenda. And when you see what's happened in Berlin, the banning of importation, what's happening in London, in the House of Commons, and now see this in Washington, you go, this is a coordinated effort. I don't think there's any doubt at this point. This is
Yeah.
a coordinated international effort to end hunting in Africa. And people are now waking up, particularly in Africa, they're waking up to what an egregiously bad thing this is. And here's the point. The point is animals are going to die in Africa, whether we hunt them or not.
Right.
And if they have no value, they're going to be killed as crop raiders and cattle killers and threats to families.
Yeah, one of
So
the images in your article is of some cattle, in a field, and then there's an elephant 50 yards behind them. Like,
Yeah, we took that photo in Tanzania 2 years ago. I was there, and I've written about that issue as well. Cattle and elephants in East Africa. It's a big deal because the human cattle expansion across much of Africa has really become a serious problem for a lot of wildlife, not just elephants. And so we've got to figure out, how does that work? How do we get a handle when the Maasai use cattle as a currency, and they don't harvest them. They continually grow the herd, and it's unsustainable. So at some point, the governments of Tanzania and other countries in East Africa are going to have to come to grips with, how do we control this, despite the cultural drive coming from the Maasai, the indigenous people. So that's a whole nother issue. But
uh-huh, yeah.
but I think the focus on what the Fish and Wildlife Service did, and how badly they missed the mark, if in fact they care about elephants. That's again the fundamental question.
And what
If
did
you
they
care
do?
about
Just
elephants,
ban the importation of ivory?
yeah, they're just making it much more difficult to get ivory in, and that's basically creating a situation where people don't want to go hunt elephants because they don't want to fight trying to get the ivory back in, or maybe the ivory can't come back in. So it's disrupting that model of hunter funded conservation through, expensive animals to hunt. And when you do that, the downstream consequences now should be very obvious. There's no mystery as to what happens. Even in Botswana, when they banned elephant hunting for 5 years,
Yeah.
uh,
What a
President Masisi,
misstep.
yeah, it was about 5 years that they had a ban on elephant hunting in Botswana, and Botswana's got some 230,000 or 130,000 elephants,
Yeah.
and they have a big majority of the savanna elephants in all of Africa. So anyway, he commissioned and convened a panel of NGOs, biologists, experts throughout Botswana and elsewhere, and said, let's review this, because I'm getting a lot of negative feedback from my constituents, essentially in Botswana, saying this is not working. My crops are being destroyed. We're getting no payment. We have no meat coming from this hunting enterprise anyway. It's a lose 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 on ground for the people who actually live with the wildlife. So this commission came together, and they said, look, it's been a failure. This was not a conservation success. And again, I wrote about that as well, just to make people aware of the fact that this was reviewed, and then they
Mhm.
lifted the moratorium, and now you can do limited hunting in Botswana. But if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't allow the importation of the ivory, doesn't make any difference, right?
Right,
The
right.
majority of hunters hunting in Africa for elephant are American.
So Botswana has roughly, by all the articles I've read over the last 4 or 5 years, I don't know, 60,000 animals over carrying capacity. If they've got 130, they say they should have between 50 and 70. That's what the habitat can support. So even if, I don't know how many of the 450 elephants American hunters are taking annually come from Botswana, but it's still a drop in the bucket. Like, they've got a big problem. And I've read articles where they're talking about turning them to dog food and this, that, and the other. I'm like, I don't know what the end game is for them, but it isn't American hunters unless they lowered the price, and they just had like a fire sale on.
Yeah. Again, it's just the number that are taken by sport hunters, whether American or others, is irrelevant. It's
Mhm.
biologically irrelevant. So that shouldn't really even factor into the equation at this point. But the mere fact that our federal agency in charge of this is focused on that, to me,
Right.
is just so incredibly disingenuous that somebody's got to call them out on it. And I think it's time, as I brought up in the piece, it's probably time for congressional oversight to be looking at the Fish and Wildlife Service, and let's understand exactly what are they doing and why are they doing it? What's the biological, the science-based justification for what they're doing? And frankly, they don't have it.
Yeah.
And our Congress needs to wake up, and ultimately the Fish and Wildlife Service will report to them, whether it's the House committees overseeing their funding or whatever. But that's what I'm trying to pose in the piece. And furthermore, if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really cared about elephants, why wouldn't we look at the broader picture of how to reduce poaching in the 31 countries that don't allow hunting, where the
Hmm.
poaching is most significant, where the numbers are declining? And it's not a mystery where this ivory is ending up. It's ending up in essentially three countries: Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the Chinese population, even though the Chinese government has banned the open trade of ivory, there's still an awful lot of Chinese citizens that are traveling to those three countries to buy ivory products. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what influence do we have? What influence does the US government have? What could the US Fish and Wildlife Service possibly do? Well, they could orchestrate a government-wide strategy in employing the State Department and USAID. We gave $17 billion in foreign aid to Thailand in
I read
2020.
that in your piece. Yeah.
$17 billion. So do you think that maybe if we put some strings on that, that unless you end your illicit ivory trade, you're not going to qualify for those funds anymore? How long do
Right.
you think it would really take if we leverage the assets that we have? But the question again goes back to me, to the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Why are they not driving this? You are the experts inside of the federal government. You have access. You could,
I have an idea.
yeah, let's hear it.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the new BIDA rule change that could potentially affect the National Wildlife Refuge System, which has
Mhm.
we have like 570-ish national wildlife refuges where on most of them hunters and anglers have opportunity to pursue those pastimes. And they've written this new rule that would, in the name of climate change, close potentially up to 400 of those to sportsmen and women completely in the name of climate change. So we're talking about science, right? Like there is
Mhm.
no science to support that. Then you go and look at who's writing policy for the National Wildlife Refuge System. And one of the policy writers right now is a gal named Jenny Keatinge, who I went and looked at her employment history on LinkedIn. She has Defenders of Wildlife. She has Center for Biological Diversity and Humane Society of the United States. The
The
Holy
tri
Grail, right? I mean, like all three of the worst of the worst. And now she's
well,
writing policy for an entity of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is really at its core designed to benefit sportsmen and conservation. You know, kind of hand in hand. It's a
who paid
symbiotic
for it?
relationship. Do
Well,
what?
I mean, who paid for them, right? Who paid for the National Wildlife
Right.
Refuge?
Uh huh.
Duck hunters did through duck stamp sales.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's fine. Let's not have a duck stamp anymore, and we'll save that money, and you guys can fund the National Wildlife Refuge System through your tax checkoffs, whatever you want to do. Good luck
Mm-hmm.
with that.
Yeah. So I mean, but the answer is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is trending in the wrong direction as far as preservation, rewilding over the model that we know works. It's tried and true.
Yeah, I think, and look, I've got to, when I write a piece like this, I've got to give them their due. I have my own beliefs on what's driving what they're doing. But I've got to be able to point out the error of their ways through empirical evidence, and I'm happy to do that. It's strange to me that an agency full of, and I know a lot of Fish and Wildlife Service guys, and they're not of this ilk. They're hunters, they're sportsmen, they're a part of the culture. That's why they got into it in the first place. So it's not categorically as if everybody in the US Fish and Wildlife Service is of that same mindset.
Right.
No different, frankly, than the FBI and what you see sometimes on what happens in Washington versus the field offices, et cetera. But I think it is interesting that the Fish and Wildlife Service um, doesn't seem to really care about science as much as they do perceived acceptance.
Right.
And I don't know how we get them back without congressional oversight to a science-based entity. And that's what we've got to do. We've at the end of the day, science has to speak for wildlife management. If we don't do that, we're going to have things like we see in the referendum states like Colorado,
Yeah.
and it's ballot box biology. It's not science-based biology, which is a dangerous, very dangerous slope.
Oh yeah. Wildlife management in being carried out in the court of public opinion.
Yeah. What could go wrong? What could
Why
go
even
wrong?
have biologists? That's what
Right?
question in
Exactly.
Colorado. Why even
Yeah,
bother
yeah,
paying those people?
right.
Botswana President Mokgweetsi, and this was in the news, and kind of tongue in cheek, but he offered Germany 20,000 elephants. He's like, "I'll send them to you if you're gonna," because I guess Germany was similarly enacting some kind of import ban You might know more about exactly why he was doing that, but of course, Germany doesn't have a place for 20,000 elephants, nor do they want them. But Germany's dictating to Botswana how to manage their wildlife. So uh, it's good to see. And I don't know if we've seen enough of that, but African leaders standing up and saying, "Come on, man, throw us a bone, help us out here."
Well, I think it's capturing the international narrative through shock, and I think it was highly effective. I read something about north of a billion impressions came off that campaign to say we're going to send 20,000 elephants to Berlin
Yeah.
right after Germans had banned, the import of African trophies. And so it really, and my understanding is President Masisi is going to Germany to do a press conference in the coming month, I think in June. And there's going to be an awful lot of European and other media that will assemble around that. So he's now created this narrative where everybody's aware of what's going on. What are you talking about? Shipping 20,000 elephants, and you saw some of the AI generated, images, which were pretty
Uh,
fantastic. Of elephants lined up at the airport, 747s. It looked like Noah's Ark in a 747, all getting ready to go with their tickets to Berlin, and it was just one of those visuals that it gave everybody pause, right? It was really a genius communication strategy, and I understand the CIC, which is a hunting organization in Europe, was involved in some of that as well. And I think they're just getting a lot smarter about we got to break through. They're not listening to the Africans. We've got to do something in the media to the mainstream that gets people who aren't engaged, who don't really have a dog in the hunt, to step back and go, what is this thing about? And then they dig in and they understand it. It's like, of course, these African leaders want control of running their own wildlife, just like we want control of running our own wildlife. How dare we, as an outside entity, outside nations, try and influence something as basic as wildlife management inside a sovereign territory?
yeah. Well, and it's not just in Africa. We saw a huge conservation success story. I believe it was in Pakistan, and I don't have any of this like literature in front of me, but it was a couple of years ago. Was it some kind of markhor species that was on the brink of extinction, and they've brought it back because because of international hunter dollars, and they've invested in that resource, and they've recovered to a point where they can harvest a handful every year. Uh, like it's not just Africa; it's anywhere where the animals have a value, they're going to stay. I shot my buffalo a couple years ago, and it was one of the most rewarding things I've experienced. Is we went to a school. The school was built by my safari company with
Mhm.
$100. I played soccer with these kids on a field that was bulldozed with $100. Those kids drink water out of a well that was dug with $100. And then we took half of the buffalo to the school, and they sang and danced in appreciation for like red meat that they were going to, you know, be fed with. And I'm just kind of always like, wow, this is all because of hunters right here.
Yeah, look, and I wrote about that in the piece as well. And those are dollars that never show up in NGO reports. They never show up in governmental reports. These are American hunters mostly that go there, and they say they see an impoverished village, and they say, what would it take to build a school? They could really use a well. They could really use a fence to
Mhm.
keep the elephants and the lions out of the huts. And so, okay, it's going to cost $50,000. All right, we can raise that. Let's do that. And they come back in 2 years, and it's built, and the people are healthy and they're living better, and nobody did that because they wanted a tax write-off. They did it
Yeah.
because it was the right thing to do. And again, that story is so seldom told or shown. And I would imagine if you shot video of that, try and get that on CBS Evening News, try and get that on NBC News. It's
No,
not
we
gonna.
just put it on Instagram where they stifled
Yeah,
it because it was hunting related content, right?
right.
We don't want to
In,
show the world the good things that
in
hunters
free
do.
America. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What happened to the? So you went elephant hunting twice. Were you successful?
I was, yeah, and I would say by every measure. I mean, it was an interesting thing to experience an elephant hunt, and again, you're hunting an elephant. You're not just elephant hunting. You're looking for a very specific old bull. Starts with a big track that's got lots of cracks in it, a 45-year-old plus animal, and you track and you track and you track. You know, you're on those tracks for hours and hours in the sand, and eventually you hope to catch up to them. And when you do, it's an intense moment. I mean, it's about as close as you can get to hunting dinosaurs on this planet right now.
Uh-huh. And what happens to the elephants once they're shot?
Well, and we typically shoot when we film these things time lapses of
Uh-huh.
exactly that.
Yeah, but I just
Let's
want you to explain it for the audience.
Yeah, well, you know, an elephant gets shot, and you know, and frankly, none of the community that comes, the villagers somehow come out of tunnels. I don't know exactly how they get there, but there is a moccasin brigade that's alive and well in Africa. And the moment there's an elephant down, I don't know if they're on cell phones or what the deal is, but there's 100 people showing up with knives and machetes and buckets, and they start disassembling the animal and saving the meat, the skin, um, parts of the bones. So almost nothing goes to waste. And it's obviously a big deal to the community to have that volume of meat. And I would liken it to when you see the Barrow Alaskans, the Inuit community up there, when they bring in a bowhead whale. You know, it's an entire community that comes together to harvest that whale and to use every aspect of that animal. And it's basically the same thing here in Africa when it comes to
Uh-huh.
elephant.
Huh. Yeah, I think that's something that that the anti-hunting community doesn't want to admit. Like, well, you know, what about the people in Africa? They want all they care about is their emotions. Like, oh, you shouldn't shoot an elephant. Okay, well, why not? Well, it just makes me feel bad. Well, okay, but what about look at this picture of what you just described? Maybe a picture that you took or a time lapse image that you took on one of your filming trips. What about that? And they just dismiss it like that doesn't exist or I don't care about those people. It's not a very humanitarian way to look at the world. Like I care about the elephant more than I care about those villagers.
Well, not only that, I think the animal rights community tends to look at hunting as an individual act, an individual animal, as opposed to a species, right? So they're more concerned about stopping the act of hunting than they are saving the greater herd, right? If hunting means that we can have more elephant, controlled hunting means that we can have more elephants at the end of the day, they still won't side with that because they can't get past the visual of one animal dying, even though these animals die in nature, of course, all the time. And it's really it's such a dichotomy. It's just hard to get your mind around people that can't look at the greater good. And then, you know, look, if you want to take a nefarious view of what they're doing, they're raising money, right? They're simply raising money. Where does that money go? Let's follow
Right.
the money, HSUS. Oh, you can follow it all the way to the Bahamas. You can follow it to all sorts of hedge funds. You can follow it to, you know, all sorts of non nonprofit uses. So yeah, it's why are they doing this? They're doing this to raise money. They really don't care about elephants. I don't believe. I don't
Right.
think they care about animals in general. I think they care about raising money and lining their pockets. I think at this point there's enough evidence out there, particularly with HSUS,
Well,
which
the
was
heads of those organizations do, but then they prey on the visceral, emotional reaction of, I'm going to say, the sheep that see this image and then they're too stupid to research it for themselves or to, I don't know, have such a laissez faire attitude about the whole thing that they just don't care. They see the image and, like, that's my truth. That's bad.
yeah.
I'm going to send these people some money.
Well, the question for us is how do we get that story to the mainstream, right? You and I
Uh,
can have a conversation as hunters that, hey, this is hunting is a great thing. It's wonderful. We all can agree on that based on the science, based on the empirical evidence of what hunting has done for conservation and sustainable conservation. And yet, you know, the animal rights groups, they don't care. I mean, it's just not what they are concerned with. They don't care about sustaining wildlife populations. I fundamentally don't believe that they have interest at all. But as you say, they prey on the people that aren't aware because they haven't been shown the information. They haven't been told the information. We don't have access to the mainstream media because, frankly, the opposition has co-opted the mainstream media, and it's very difficult to talk about hunting and conservation
Mhm.
uh, in the mainstream. So that's our challenge. We've allowed them to define us instead of defining ourselves to
Yeah.
the masses, which is a mistake.
Yeah. Well, we were reactionary for way too long.
Way too
Way too
long.
long. Uh, but I think I blame social media for that because I think we were reactionary because it wasn't in front of everyone's face. Like 20 years ago, did the average American really have an opinion on trophy hunting? A negative one anyway? No, they didn't. By and large, of course, animal rights activists did, but you know, most people probably just it was out of sight, out of mind. And now we have social media, and it's in your face every day, all day long. And the antis are well organized; they're well funded. I got to give them credit for that. They are well organized and they are well funded. Um,
But I think conversely that we sat back for far too long, which you said, and
mhm.
we did as a community, as an industry, an outdoor industry, we sat back and we allowed the narrative to be taken to the mainstream that was not our narrative, which was not accurate, but we allowed it to happen, and we did engage.
Yeah.
And I've sat at a lot of meetings with a lot of NGO leaders and saying, what the hell are we doing? How
Mhm.
much longer do you want to put up with this? At what point do you feel like you should engage? And we should have a sustained educational program, a sustained media campaign nationwide to tell our story, to make sure that they can't get away with this kind of stuff to the mainstream. And so it's interesting when when you see the conservation groups who are doing great work. Don't get me wrong. Um, we've been so focused on habitat. We're all about. Sorry about that.
That's no worse.
We're all about habitat. We're all about putting more habitat on ground, getting better elk and duck and whatever populations in the sorry. So when we do that, when we just focus on habitat and doing the good work of habitat, we think that's all we need to do. In reality, we got to be spending a lot more time and energy and resources talking about why do we hunt,
Mhm.
what's good about hunting, what's sustainable about hunting, what's great for everyone about hunting. And until we do that, I think we're going to continually see this precipitous slide. And when you live in a state like Colorado, like I do, you're on the front lines. I mean, you're
Oh yeah.
seeing exactly what's going on between Denver and Boulder and the referendum process. Um, it's not out of the question that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's a referendum to end all hunting in Colorado. It's just not that difficult to see. And
Right.
this is, I would say, the top hunting state in the lower 48. Most
Yeah.
species, greatest amount of access, et cetera. And if you
I
can do
sat
that,
in a meeting yesterday with about 40 uh some were influencers, some were podcast hosts, some were from, corporations, industry folks, and it was with Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management, Dan Gates, and was hosted by Howell for Wildlife. We were talking specifically about your state and like how do
Mhm.
we use our platform, because a lot of our platforms it is an echo chamber. For me, it's because I'm shadow banned. Like I non followers don't see my content, right? Because and that's intentional by Meta to prevent that from happening. So how do we get the message out there? And really, we've got to ask our followers to repost stuff so that other people can see stuff. Because obviously, if you're having a conversation with me, we're both hunters. The people listening to this show, 99% hunters, right? So it's getting it out there to the other voters of Colorado that maybe don't have an opinion. But why should they vote against this, right? That's the crux of the issue is how do we reach
Well,
those
and
people?
again, I'm going back to what you brought up, which is we sat on the sidelines for so long. Why does
Mm,
Meta feel like they have the ability to shadow ban you? Because they feel like they've got cover, whereas the hunters don't give them any cover.
right.
And that's the same with our politics. Politicians vote the right way when they have the cover to do it. When you give them media cover to vote the right way, they'll do it. But they're not generally going to stick their neck out unless they're in a district that is full of hunters, et cetera. There's no risk for them, right?
Right.
So again, this is something I've harped on in the industry for at least 10 years, given a lot of speeches, done a lot of podcasts and radio interviews, trying to get the industry, trying to get the community to wake up that we've got to take our message to the mainstream. It's got to be sustained. It's got to be on scale. And if we don't do it now, it's going to be too late. And it may be too late right now at the end of the day. Look, I can't go to a network, a television, mainstream cable TV network, and pitch anything that has hunting in it. They will categorically say, forget it.
Right.
They might do a little time buy at Dark 30 primetime Guam or something. But in terms of what's on their air in prime time, they would never touch it. Now, if it's an indigenous person killing something, life below zero, for instance, fine, we can do that. All right. So how do we start building a narrative to bridge between that? So we've got to be sophisticated on how we do that. And I think at this juncture, there's enough of the industry that realizes we've got to go mainstream. We can keep talking to ourselves, but we're 4% of the population, and we're not gonna affect change on the state
Mhm.
and federal level at 4% of the population unless we do something significantly different than what we're doing. And what is that? How do we do that? How do we take our message mainstream? You saw Bass Pro Shops did a fantastic Super Bowl ad, and I talked about that 2 years previous to that ad at a speech in Nashville in front of a whole bunch of industry leaders. I'm not suggesting that Bass Pro did it because I brought that up, but
Right.
that was the that was the idea. Why aren't we thinking bigger? We've got the resources. We've got Pittman Robertson dollars, the excise tax that we created, billions of dollars. Why aren't we using that, not just for habitat work, not just for other programs, but to market and promote and advance the North American model? And those are questions that the larger industry has got to grasp. They've got to get their arms around that and do something about it before it's too late.
Yeah. Well, I think it's becoming more of a united front. I wish I would have seen. So Hal organized it, and I'm not. I'm really. I got to give them their dues for putting that together. But like, I would have liked to have seen SCI, DSC, Sportsman's Alliance all represented there, and it wasn't. It was mostly influencers and like Vortex was there and Onyx and some others. There's probably a handful of companies which I thought was really good, right? Because that they're taking note, like their bottom line's going to be affected. And I think at the end of the day, like if these companies alienate the non-hunter, who cares? They're not buying their products anyway.
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
I mean, the anti-hunter isn't okay. Don't alienate the non-hunter. That's a future potential customer, but like the anti-hunters, it doesn't matter. Like if these people throw a fit about, oh, Vortex did this, like, well, who cares? You weren't going to buy our scopes.
Well,
You
but if
support
you look at Colorado,
HSUS.
I think there's 26 states that have the referendum process, right?
Oh, that was mentioned in that call too. Was because that was a big point of contention. Like how Colorado might be too late. Hopefully not. But how do these other states prevent this from happening? Right, and that was a big part of that.
Well, I think it's Washington or Oregon. I think it's Oregon that has a referendum on the ballot now, has a initiative on the ballot to ban all hunting in the state.
Mm,
So this is where we're going, right? And the
right.
thing about the referendum process is it circumvents any science-based. Your biologists are irrelevant. The case of introducing, let's say, wolves in Colorado, the state agency, of course, studied it $2 million in a study to figure out it's really a bad idea, and here's why. And which had no bearing on the referendum process, because the people in Denver and Boulder thought it'd be a great idea to have a bunch of wolves 100
Yeah.
miles west of where they are.
Well,
The wolves.
CPW couldn't comment on it anyway. If you're an employee of
Well,
CPW,
right.
they had a gag order, or it might be a state bylaw, but you're not. So the biologists who have the most knowledge on the topic are are prevented from commenting on said topic.
Well, once it goes to the ballot, that's exactly right. So
Yeah.
isn't that amazing? The thing that they're chartered to do, which is to guide public policy relative to wildlife, they're prohibited from doing. And
Yeah.
and do you think that's an accident? Do you
Right.
think it was a mistake that so this is all part of the agenda. And so as you look at this in Colorado, and again, I'm with you. I would love to see, Safari Club. I would love to see all the the pro hunting organizations set up shop, frankly, in Colorado and say, this is it. We're putting a line in the sand. Yeah, we get the politics aren't exactly right in Denver and Boulder, but Colorado can still be saved. And let's really make an effort to try and end this here and save Colorado. Because if the antis can take Colorado out of the equation for hunters, there's no end. There's
Right.
absolutely no end to where they can go with that.
That's the scary
So
part.
yeah, it is.
It's like if I mean that's the playbook. They're going to keep going back to it, and we've seen, and we have this same crap going on in my state now. Nobody ever would have imagined Texas would be under fire from the antis, but they've disguised themselves very well as this group called Texans for Mountain Lions. Well, they 2 years ago started petitioning Texas Parks and Wildlife. We need mandatory trap checks for mountain lions. We need seasons and quotas and bag limits. And I mean, we treat mountain lions like coyotes. The reality is, you're never going to see a mountain lion. Very, very few Texas outdoorsmen will see a mountain lion in their hunting lifetime, right? You have to get lucky. But they paint this picture of, well, Texans, we're all just out there setting traps and killing these lions indiscriminately, and everyone that gets seen gets shot. And it's like, well, no, that's not how it really is. But now my state agency has put out these. They did a work group, stakeholder work group, and there was about 4 people from Texans for Mountain Lions represented on there. No SCI, no you, Chris, no me, Cable, no.
Mm.
There might have been a few hunters and ranchers on there, right? They said that it was evenly split, but I saw people from, big cat sanctuaries on there, and various what I would say would be raises my suspicion level of why these people would be on that. And so then their resolution is, okay, mandatory 36-hour trap checks and no canned mountain lion hunting. Well, that's not happening anyway. And our wildlife diversity guy came on the show a couple of weeks ago and said, well, there's game wardens that said it happened. I did some research, can't find one documented case of it. Someone told me it happened a long time ago. But the idea of like catching a mountain lion, how are you going to catch a mountain lion? Very hard to do alive, right? And then I guess call someone and be like, hey, come hunt this cat that I caught and I'm going to release it for you. I don't know. I don't think that was really happening. But the point of the whole thing is those might not be huge deals, because I think most people would say, yeah, canned mountain lion hunting, I'm not down with that. I would say I'm not down with that. So that's an easy one. But they paint this picture that like that's really happening a lot, and hunters are responsible for this. And then they get the court of public opinion just to side with them just a little bit. And then 5 years from now, Texas Parks and Wildlife is going to be like, okay, we're going to have our first mountain lion season. And then 10 years later, they're going to be like, okay, we're going to reduce the quota. And then, 20 years from whatever the time frame is, now we're just going to ban mountain lion hunting. That's how it happens. That's how it's happened across all of the West. And Colorado's like living it right now today. Who would have ever thought this could happen in Colorado,
Well,
the great
I
hunting
think
state?
I think it's pretty easy to see the strategy now when you get wolves introduced, despite the fact that there were already wolves coming in, but you now force the issue and wolves are being brought into Colorado. You ban mountain lion hunting if that comes to pass. And then you've got black bears that pound the elk calves as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got 3 apex predators on the landscape.
And you can't
And
hunt black bears with hounds in Colorado.
no. Yeah. I don't even think you could use bait.
Yeah,
And
no, you can't.
so now it's a situation where, okay, well, what's the narrative? We have to have hunting to control these populations.
Right.
No, you don't. You got mountain lions that take, according to state estimates, almost half the mule deer herd every year are taken by mountain lions. And then you have wolves, and then you have black bears. Why do we really need hunters to do any of this stuff? And this is a $1 billion industry. This is the lifeblood of rural Colorado. And it's not difficult to see the strategy. It's just amazing to me that we don't have a community that has awakened to that sees that and goes, all right, what's our long-term strategy? This isn't about defeating one more referendum. It's about creating a different playing field for all future referendums. How do we do that? How do we win that? And then how do we win the hearts and minds in Denver and Boulder, the majority of whom don't have any understanding of these issues whatsoever? Where is our media campaign? Where is our educational campaign? What are we doing to get into the school systems? With all this Pittman-Robertson money flowing into the state agencies, what the hell are they doing to recruit and retain more? And that's the question I have for a lot of our state agencies when it comes to the amazing amount of money that's flowed into them through the Pittman-Robertson Act. And at the end of the day, we should be flourishing, giving the hundreds of millions of dollars that annually get pumped into the system through that tax. By the way, a self-imposed tax, right?
Right.
And so where is the proof that this is a good spend? I keep looking at this and I go, all right, when the Pittman-Robertson Act was passed, we didn't have a fully fledged Ducks Unlimited. We didn't have Rocky Mountain Elk. We didn't have NWTF. We didn't have QU, pheasants, ruffed grouse, wild salmon. We didn't have those groups. Well, now we do. Now we've got a very big private sector delivery mechanism for conservation education to drive the narrative on that. And oh, by the way, why wouldn't they qualify for Pittman-Robertson funds? Why does it have to go to the federal government to then be dispersed to the state agencies? Tell me the efficiency of that. How much are we losing out of every dollar just by virtue of the transition from Washington to the states? And I had friends at the North American Wildlife Management Conference. I think it was up in Calgary this past fall. And they said, look, the shocking thing to them was the state agency directors, several of them came out kind of privately, but not so privately, and said, look, the R3 program, recruitment, retention, reactivation, that is only going to slow the demise of hunting. We think hunting is going to go away. It gives us time, however, to find new funding mechanisms for our agency. I don't know how you take that, but I take that as, what an appalling comment, and I said, if the average hunter in America knew that was the feeling of many of these state directors, they would be appalled. They'd be calling for an absolute moratorium on any more funding flowing to the state agencies.
Yeah.
And I think it's time that we make them accountable for the money that's flowing to them. And I think it's something that's got to come pretty damn soon.
Well, we could go on about misappropriating those funds all day. I mean, CWD is something I think has been just completely blown out of proportion. And it's like, I know Texas Parks and Wildlife gets a lot of grant money for research on that disease. I'm not seeing anything really good come from that. So I don't know. I'm not saying it's not real, but it's been around a long time. And I would venture to say it's been around longer than when people say it was discovered in Colorado in the 50s in a high fence. I bet you we just didn't know what we were testing for, me personally, and that it was probably around before that in the wild.
I just want accountability. I'm just looking for accountability. You take that kind of money, we want to see some results. Do we have more and better hunting? Do we have more hunters? Do we have better conservation programs? And at the end of the day, let's see the accounting on that and the accountability. So I think the mere fact that we've seen this decline over decades, frankly, in terms of the real impact on hunting and hunters in America, the cultural aspect of how hunting is viewed in America, gives me pause that this kind of spend is the way to go. It absolutely begs the question to me. There's got to be a better way. We've got to find a better way. We've got to have a different pool of people working on this who have a vested interest in seeing a goal reached at the point on the horizon. And the state agencies don't have that.
So how do we here? So this is your grand analysis of the broken system. How do we fix that? How do you and I help fix that problem?
Well, I've talked about this in a lot of different forums, and frankly, I really do fundamentally believe that more of that money, Pittman-Robertson money, should be flowing to the NGOs, should be flowing to the Camel Coalition, the Ducks, the NWTF, all those organizations, by virtue of the fact that they can raise private sector dollars, ought to be qualifying for some of the PR funds. This is independent of, let's say, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants to do a wetlands program, and DU is the best delivery arm to do that. That's fine. That's great. That's probably efficient. I'm talking about Pittman-Robertson dollars that sportsmen stepped up and said, we want to be taxed because we want to have better hunting and fishing down the road. We want to have a future for our lifestyle. And so I think I think it would be an interesting conversation to have in the Congress at this point. Who wants to sponsor the bill that X percentage of Pittman Robertson dollars now the private sector conservation organizations, the ducks, the NWTF, Rocky Mountain elk, quail, pheasants, rough grouse, wild salmon, et cetera, can qualify for some of those federal funds, which are, again, self-imposed taxes from sportsmen,
Right.
Pittman and Dingle Johnson on the fishing side.
$1.7 billion last year.
Yeah, it's an enormous pool of money. And look, habitat work is important. We understand that. But I would argue today, habitat is not our greatest threat. The loss of habitat is not right now our greatest threat. Our
Right.
greatest threat is the ballot box and what's happening when it comes to, those kinds of initiatives that are limiting the ability to even go hunt and fish.
Mm. Well, 100% agree with you on that front. How would you, because, and I'll take DU for example, and DU is the sponsor of this show, and I've worked with the Dallas DU committee for 12 or 15 years as a volunteer. I love DU, but there are people, hunters out there, duck hunters, who are like, oh, I don't like DU. I don't, they misappropriate funds, or I never see any benefit where I hunt, How would you convince that person that, with their pre-existing negative idea of these NGOs, or one specifically, and it could be DU, could be anyone. NWTF never did anything in my neck of the woods. How do you convince them that they should get a piece of the Pittman Robertson pie?
Well, did the state agency do anything in their backyard? I guess that would be another question, right? Did
Right.
the money that's flowing to the state agency, did they feel like the dollars spent with the state and federal government are more effective than dollars spent with private sector conservation groups? That's a question.
I think it's a
I,
fair one, as we just addressed. Like,
yeah,
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right now seems to be abandoning science-based wildlife management. So I think it's a fair question, and I think
100%.
it would be, the reality is probably the NGOs that are pro hunting are going to invest that money with more thought and wisdom than an agency that's kind of turned their back on
I would
hunters.
take that bet.
Yeah,
100%. I would take that bet. I think that's a
I would
big
too.
move. I think there's probably congressmen out there who would adopt this in a heartbeat, and I think you can get legislative support behind it, and I think that would be transformative to our narrative and our future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are politicians who do care. At the SCI show, I went to a luncheon, and I think there were 6 United States senators in there, and another 4 congressmen or women at one luncheon. So they were there,
Yeah.
and there's more than that are out there. So
No, they've got a
the
very effective policy office in Washington. Ben Cassidy's done a ton of work out there, and Laird is
mhm,
terrific, and so they've got a lot going on. It's just that their fronts are many. I mean, there's a
yeah,
lot of battles to be fought, and the scale is going to require more than just one organization, I think,
yeah,
to push back given the headwinds that we've got. I mean, we've got Disney and National Geographic merging, right? What could possibly go wrong with the creators of
mm,
Bambi and now merging with the gold box at National Geographic in 170 countries of the world with their television networks and platforms. So,
you
you could,
saw
uh,
you saw Peacock is coming out with Queer Planet. Did you see that? This was released last week. You're probably bear hunting, but yeah,
somehow,
it is. It is. And so when you come out with a wildlife show, like, the target audience is generally like kids. Young people are going to be the ones consuming that the most, and they're basically saying gay ping. I mean, I watched the 30-second sizzle reel of it. It's like gay penguins, bisexual gorillas, and
wow.
and the message was like, everyone just needs to have more sex, and with who you have it with doesn't really matter, because we're all just individuals. Like, no, completely planning this lie that, oh, the natural world just is going to get by on trans or gay sex. Like, no, it's not. There's one way that we procreate, and I guess medicinally, I mean, like with modern medicine, yes, 2 women can have a baby, right? Gorillas can't. Last time I checked. So what? But that's what we're up against. It's just like insanity.
Yeah.
Uh,
What do you do with that? Yeah.
I don't know. Educate your kids, because the public school system's probably going to show them that.
There you go.
uh, all right. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. I've certainly enjoyed the conversation. How we uh, how we got to where we are from a conversation on elephant importation permits. I don't know, but I thought it was beneficial, and it
It was,
opens up some very important questions on really the future. Where do we go from here, and how do we come up with a formula? Because we've all said, yeah, we've been reactionary for too long. Okay, well now we're being proactive. Okay, well what does that mean, and how do we invest our dollars frivolously? Uh,
yeah.
as a
Well,
as a
whatever
heads up.
we do, we're on the clock. I think that's an important takeaway as well. We better
Mhm.
figure it out and do it soon.
Where can folks find you, Chris?
Sporting Classics TV, Instagram is, posts there pretty regularly, and activities. DorseyPictures.com is another place where a lot of our TV ventures and film ventures are. So those are two good venues.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the forefront, and kudos to Forbes for letting you have that forum to write that piece. I think that's very important. So
Mhm.
appreciate Forbes giving us the forum. Well done on that piece. I enjoyed reading it, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.
All right, you too. Bye bye.